Thank you, Martin. Now I would like to open the floor for discussion, for a general discussion. I would like to remind you that this is an open debate, and we would like to make it sharp, and we would like to really focus on tangible solutions, practical solutions. So this is where we would like the direction of this discussion to go, okay? And I don't come across as a very tough facilitator, unlike Sam, but I will stop you if you start advocating for an issue, okay? So let's talk about real solutions and how do we achieve the SDGs. And I can see that we already have first comment, a question, please.
Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. I have a question. A lot of people have mentioned, and I'm amongst them, doing projects in the form of workshops and education and capacity building sessions. And I would just like to know how you do it, or better said, how do you measure the impact and make sure that it's actually having a behavioral change? Because measuring that is actually really complicated. Like, you can do RCTs, like randomized controlled trials and these things, but it's not that easy. And how do you make sure that what you're investing your efforts in, it's actually working? So I would like to know how you're doing that.
Thank you. I'll use the example of a program that we have called Fleet Farming. We created Fleet Farming through bringing together people in the community, intergenerational, interdisciplinary, in a think tank we have called The Hive. And what happened was we brought them together about food issues, but we quickly came to the right question. And I think the right question is such an important aspect in human-centered design. We didn't ask, how do we solve the food security or food sanctity problem in Orlando? Instead, we first identified that 1/3 of climate emissions come from the industrial agricultural complex. And from that we said, how do we take a solution there plus the solution of food and put them both together? And the genius of this was that for us it meant bicycles and bicycle transport within zip codes for food, and growing food and not lawns. And when you put them both together, it had an appeal that transcends just the people who care about food issues or just care about aspects of maybe cycling and health. And from there, we created the initiative. Now, in the metrics and indicators that it takes to do it, before you go and do something, you may not necessarily know what they are, but you need to bring in as many subject matter experts as possible once you have the solution and the course of action to then execute it. And that was the general public, food experts. We've had many subsequent breakouts, but it really comes down to asking the right question, piloting after that initial development phase, and then setting the metrics and indicators. Led by the targets and indicators of the SDGs, the problem that we encountered, though, was that they don't descend enough to the local level, where you're talking about one block in a neighborhood. That block can have an overall push of the SDGs for sure, but we have to kind of come up with our own way to do that, and I'm happy to share that with you.
Thank you, Clayton. Anyone? Please.
Hi there. Yeah, this is just a question for Anthony. Could you give us a better understanding of what the EPA is doing now with the change of presidency? What are the new approaches? How has that affected your work, and how it has affected wider efforts from other NGOs as a whole as well, around the whole issue?
What was that? So, I'm not sure that is anyone else in here who works for government, or anyone else in this sticky situation?
I could help you.
Thank you.
The EPA right now is aggressively trying to counter all U.S. policies on climate change. The Clean Power Plan of President Obama, removal from the Paris Climate Agreement, and in general, deregulation of polluters. So we're in the worst phase of the EPA since its start. I'll speak for myself and my institution, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we've never seen an assault on the environment like this. To understand it, it's important to understand that the Republican Party has been funded by massive polluters for a number of years, led by the Koch industries. These are two brothers who own the largest privately owned petrochemicals and pipeline industry and refinery industry in the United States. And they have funded the so-called climate denial community and the Republican Party candidates and many other groups, universities like George Mason University and others. The goal was to create an environment in which it would be possible to have the U.S. try to step out of environmental protection. For the moment, they have succeeded in this at a policy level because the Republican Party and the White House are formally opposed to the Paris Climate Agreement and to U.S. policies to control emissions. In my estimation, it's a matter of profound political corruption is what's happening, because this is basically funding to politicians either to have them reelected or to terrorize them into speaking lies so that they won't face opposition in primary elections from those who are ready to take the funds. So this is a very dismal situation from a governmental point of view. In the 40 years of the EPA, 40 plus years, it's never been like this. It's never been headed by an aggressive anti-environmentalist. People are very unhappy. They write to me privately. They are leaving the EPA in mass numbers. It's very serious. So this is our fight politically. Most Americans are pro-environmental. They see the hurricanes, they see the floods, they see toxic waste, they see lead in their water supplies, they see asthma. So they're in favor of environmental regulation. This is mainly the oil and gas and coal industry speaking with the real money. So we're in a pitched battle. It is not about science, it's not about evidence, it's about money and corruption. And the United States is a very corrupt political system right now. So that's what we're up against. There's no good news, except that cities want to do differently, states want to do differently, and these absolutely horrible politicians, real jerks, as soon as their state is hit by an environmental shock, then they come and beg for bailouts, like Mr. Greg Abbott, the quite disgusting governor of Texas. I hope everyone's watching on video. He sued the EPA for years, and then his state was hit by Hurricane Harvey, and then he asked for a $200 billion bailout. I say first, honesty, responsibility. Mr. Abbott can go home. He has not been in any way a steward of the public good. And then one can respond to this kind of urgency. But the urgency is there in part because Texas did nothing, because even though Houston was known to be a sitting duck for this kind of disaster, the oil industry prevailed to deny, to lie, to cheat. And that's what we're really facing right now. So everything we do involves the positive side of what to do and the negative side of powerful people and vested interests. So there's always the positive affirmative challenge of how to act, and there are always people making money on pollution, human trafficking, modern slavery, and so we're not living in an innocent environment. There are opponents not just people not doing anything. There are foes to the right things to do. And right now, the EPA is among the foes, which is amazing because it's an environment protection agency. But it is the opposite right now.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. Anthony, would you like to?
I will take the opportunity to say something else that's somewhat related about the U.S. in general, and that's related more to the global goals. And that's, there was a study by Interaction, a nonprofit that supports global development, that identified that in the U.S. we have about 40% of an untapped audience that could come over to our side, which is a tremendous, to add a positive spin. And these are a community that I don't think that, as much as we talk in this room and in rooms like this about partnerships, it's a community that I don't think we engage at all. And that's the people who, for one reason or another, are not involved in NGOs, who do not get involved in their company's corporate social responsibility, who do not attend church, who do not attend other religious services or means in which they would learn about these things, who are not on Twitter. These are voters that people could engage in, and communities that we could engage. And I would identify them as the soccer moms, for example, who are taking their kids to conduct community service projects and so forth, who are doing the work of the SDGs without knowing it. And we need to, all of us, identify ways to engage them, which is why I mentioned earlier Netflix, television. This is the venue through which people are learning about and engaging through politics. We need to get into that realm, talk their language, and that's what I mean by accessibility. The best practice to take away here is to meet our audience where they are.
Okay, thanks. Would you like to respond?
Tess Martin, could we have an SDG merit badge so that, you know, if you do enough training in 2 or 3 or 4 of the areas, or if you can recite the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or however the process works, you get an SDG merit badge?
It is the priority in the upcoming 3 years to mainstream the SDG in our whole program, so our main educational programs. And I'm sure we can work on that, yes.
But if you could convey that the Secretary General's office would be interested to work together with the Scouts on how to formulate that, what it might mean, how we could help to inspire young Scouts to take up the SDGs, or a feedback from the UN that they write something to SDSN youth, or get feedback, or somehow engage with them in a way that works in the merit badge approach, I would be very happy to do that.
Thank you. I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Wonderful. Okay.
Thank you for your talks. I have a question regarding visibility of the SDGs during implementation of environmental programs. So a good example of this would be in northeastern New England, where I have done a comprehensive master planning project with my peers. When we went in to go do a project like that, where you focus on, you know, land use within a town, water retention, water management, et cetera, and all these essential environmental programs, we were actually told to not mention things like the SDGs at community meetings because it could off-put people from implementing environmental programs if they connected it with the UN. So I'm just wondering, is there a balance between discussing and making visible the SDGs, and what if it hurts actually reaching the SDGs to talk about them in a program and in a context with people, and how should we treat that as evangelizing the SDGs and educating, or you know, taking prudence to be quiet about them?
Yeah, you got to play to your audience. I mean, we have many initiatives where we're warned, depending on who we're going in and you know, shaking the tin cup at to try to get funding. Some people just hate the UN, and they hate it because they think it's like the New World Order, that they're going to come and take guns from them. And these are people who are very often extremely wealthy business leaders or elected officials. And it can be a thing to where you have to play to the audience. But when you talk about poverty and job creation and education and the STEM fields, their ears perk up and they want to hear and they want to listen, and they're like, ah, yes, these are good ideas. But sometimes it's not proper in the audience you're speaking to out yourself that you're, SDG flag waving.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? A lot of times I actually don't like the phrase the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because, in communication tactics in particular, it gives this assumption that it was something that the UNs and bureaucrats came up with and then gave it to the people, whereas actually this was one of the most inclusive processes ever. 193 governments negotiated this for 3 years, day in, day out, working on the details. There were young people who voted through the My World Survey. I think there were like 5 million of them. There were NGOs at the desk. It was a mammoth process, and every single government voted on this. So the UN was just a facilitator role. It was your and our governments who came and approved of this. And as a result, you see that you don't get 10 goals, the perfect marketing number, you get 17 goals and 169 targets. So I think really using the word UN SDGs gives that impression that it was made by the UN, but we have to keep emphasizing that these are actually the kind of goals that a lot of people voted on, and that it was a negotiated process and that everyone has had a role in it. So just that quick comment.
I just want to follow up quickly on what people were saying, and it relates to something I mentioned very quickly in my remarks this morning, and we talked about the political side, but how, the academic institutions and universities are being corrupted by this kind of money. And I just want to, I'm on this hobby horse over Catholic University in Washington, D.C., because it's a pontifical university that has a business school funded by a guy called Tim Bush from the Napa Institute, and by the Koch brothers, and they're teaching libertarianism. They have climate change deniers who, when Laudato Si came out, went on TV to say climate change is a hoax. This is a pontifical university. This guy, in the middle of a mass, he would get up and say, this is, we after 8 terrible years, we now see the light. So, this is the corruption of money, and it's. I'm just giving one example, but there are many, many examples of Catholic and non-Catholic institutions all over. And if you want to see the problems, go look at who's on your board of trustees. That's usually where the problems lie. So, many of you here have, affiliations with academic institutions and universities. So I would just go look and see what's going on there, because that's the source of a lot of the problems.
Thank you, Tony. Please, yes.
I wanted to ask a quick question to a number of the overlapping comments, and then kind of to play off of that as well. A number of people mentioned we need to integrate it into the curriculum. A number of people also said we need to get more young people in the decision-making processes. Are any of your organizations working with platforms that are trying to get more people elected into office? Obviously, mayor, city council, those are all easy ways to do it. Even public school boards, if you want to put something in the curriculum, you get young people elected to that. I'd love to talk to anyone who's working on that, and that was just my question. Thank you.
Zinia?
This is a different question, but also open to anyone to answer. Where I come from, a lot of pollution and environmental, a lot of damage to the environment happens because of religious and cultural practices that have been going on for years and years. And when you talk about changing them, because these are practices that are embedded in our society, and it is what sometimes what people live for, these festivals, and it comes with a lot of pollution. It comes constant damage to the environment in different forms. And so when you talk about environmental protection, we get the backlash from people because it's changing cultural practices is very sensitive. And so that is an issue I face in India when we talk about environmental protection. And just a few days ago, the Delhi government banned firecrackers in Delhi for the celebration of Diwali, which we tried to advocate for in Mumbai as well, but it was reached with a lot of, people saying, no, we're not going to do it because this is a festival of lights and this is how we've always celebrated it, even though people cannot breathe in the city because of the amount of pollution. So I was just wondering if any of you working in this field also face such backlash when it comes to cultural practices, and how do you deal with these people when it's a sensitive topic such as religion and culture, and how these practices have been going on for so many years but obviously need to change because of the situation that we're in and the global crisis that we're in today.
Let's go from right to left. Margaret.
Yes. So on the question of decision-making that you posed, I would like to point out that you have initiatives, for example, in Istanbul. Last year at the World Humanitarian Summit, we spoke about young people being the fast responders when it comes to natural disasters and conflict and humanitarian action. And cities such as Istanbul, for example, the local government is really taking seriously the youth assembly there and working closely with the president of the Istanbul Youth Assembly to make decisions together. The Norwegian government as well strongly brings on board through the assemblies the young people to learn from the decision makers. Not only that, but also this year has been dedicated at the Africa Union as the year for the youth, and we're seeing through such processes young people being engaged in these issues. And with regards to sensitive topics, what we have learned, or rather in the previous work that I have done, is that this type of behavioral change and changing mindset does take a lot of time. It requires patience, and it requires analytically thinking about the kind of values and project skills that you should instill from the onset that would have a more positive effect and impact in the future. It does take time, and you're doing, very important work, and you will definitely see the benefits of the kind of work that you're doing, not only now, but also into the future.
Thanks, Margaret. Federico, did you want to respond as well?
Yes, thank you. To the question you posed, it is not easy to, I guess it depends from government to government, from state to state, when it comes to try to get young people elected to ensure that new ideas like introducing environmental education into curricula is applied. At the national level, I think, however, there is a further step that we need to take before that. So if a topic is not a political priority for voters, then it will not be a political priority for those running for offices. So as long as we do not ensure that climate change, environmental issues are political priorities for voters, it would be very hard to get people elected. You may have candidates, youth candidates running for offices with their priorities being climate change or environmental issues, but if we do not create a consciousness before and a sense of urgency on the climate issues and other environmental issues, those people will not be voted. So this is the reason why before I was strongly suggesting to create a sort of cooperation with media, because we need to change the way the message is framed. We need to ensure that people understand that climate change is not just an environmental issue. Climate change is posing the lives of millions of people at risk. Climate change has implications with economics, finance, and many, many other sectors. However, so I definitely agree that this should be something to do, like having especially young people promoting new ideas, but I think the first step to take is to ensure that we have climate change and other environmental issues as a political priority of voters. Despite that, at the national level, we are trying. Last year, after strong pressure from civil society, Italy convened the General States on Environmental Education, where all of environmental organizations and other organizations working on education were put together, and we discussed together how those curricula could be reformed. However, the process is long, and according to country by country, things change a lot in the way that then things are actually implemented. For instance, our country, as you may know, has the tendency to have many governments quite often changing very rapidly. We had many in the last few years, so when governments change very rapidly, it's not so easy to ensure the proposal move forward. However, I definitely agree that we should go in this direction. Just I think we need to ensure first that this is a political priority for everyone. Thanks.
Thanks. Clayton?
I'll be brief. I'll respond to Peter's comment first, or question first. The way that we had success in Orlando was very slow at first, but once we had that first success, it expedited all of the other successes that happened like a watershed leading up to now. Originally, in the passing of the ordinance that has to do with energy benchmarking and disclosure, what we did was meet with each of the county commissioners that were there that had a vote. Regardless of what political side they were, we always played into their concerns for their constituents in their district, and also with their moral compass of their political party, right? So one thing that can help with this is that you bring someone who is from their political party either with you, who is a voter, and who shares the same type of viewpoint that you do, that this is actually a very good thing for business. Also spend some time working with people who are of that particular constituent, whether it's different from you or the same, and really listen to them. Treat them as though they're the person that you are going to be debating with, to try to sway their vote for when the actual council meeting occurs. You can figure out a lot about the mentality that someone has before you actually get there for the full discussion. So that can be very, very helpful. The next aspect about changing tradition in communities. So many things have gone negatively by reaching out to other communities and cultures and saying, well, I know what to do, you have to do this too now, right? We have poisoned the indigenous populations of the planet on every continent with this kind of mentality and created huge chasms between the haves and the have-nots. So this change now to do it ethically and sustainably has to come from within. So what I would recommend is finding people in the community that you're working in who do agree that the fireworks should be banned, speaking with them about why they exactly think that is, and have them become the advocates of it in their own neighborhood. This is the same type of approach that we use for the projects that we scale to other communities. We organize people, we listen to what they believe the issues are, we advise them on sustainability because we're a subject matter expert in that, and then we help the project actually occur through funding and scaling. That approach seems as though it may be common sense, but it has wonderful effects because it's community built. And that way, they don't have the feeling that you're imposing your thoughts or values or ideals onto them. And I think that's really key.
Thanks, Clayton. I will first invite a question from Anna, if you still would like to ask a question.
I think we may have the wrong placard. Sorry, it was just, yes. Sorry, you are. Oh, placard.
Hi, my name is Anka.
Anka, sorry.
Okay, my name is Anka. I'm from Romania, and I just wanted to very briefly, in the spirit of partnership, to respond to Professor Sachs' suggestion about the Scouts, a potential collaboration there about the Scouts. So the first ever UN Youth Envoy that was appointed by Ban Ki-moon, Ahmed Al-Hendawi, who is a great leader and such a big friend of young people, is the Secretary General of the Scouts right now. So that could be, I mean, it doesn't get better than that, related to SDGs. You probably know him. So. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's as good as it can get.
Great. Kevin, please.
Sure. So I just wanted to comment really quickly, Peter, on what you were talking with regards to, I guess, young people engaging with public office or even running for public office. one of the ways that we've been able to drive some of that change at the City Council at Toronto was actually appointing a youth advocate on City Council who took ownership over things related to youth policy, and so on. And it forced them and held them accountable and to take ownership over things related to that, to report back to City Council. So you always ensure that there was always one voice there. A second thing that we've actually done is with regards to the civic appointments process. So for a long time, there's been youth advisory boards on a number of different things. The challenge is they've always been tokenistic. You don't have a real voice, you don't have a vote. It's, you know, you can raise your opinion and perspective, but they're not accountable to even respond sometimes. Instead, what we've done in Toronto is on the actual boards, there will be a preference for a youthful perspective, and ensures that someone who has a perspective of a young person, often is young themselves, actually has a seat on the Board of Governors, on a Board of Directors, and a real meaningful role that's not tokenistic and has a vote and a seat at the table. And so through that, I think it's a real systemic way of ensuring that there's youthful perspective in all aspects that are important with regards to decision-making, at least for us at the municipal level.
Thanks. Anyone would like to respond? Okay, Lori, please.
Thank you so much. I would just like to share a really successful story from Taiwan. And it's a nonprofit company that's actually received the carbon footprint certification from EPA and also Germany. It's called Da'ai Technology. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. Da'ai means great love, so great love technology, and actually encompasses a lot of questions and people that have asked about culture, about different religions. So in Taiwan, they are very sensitive to UN and all these issues. So we don't use UN, SDG, these kind of languages. We use like coexisting with the earth, Mother Earth, we're taking for granted, what we're gonna do for the next generation. So like we reword the things like these. And Da'ai Technology is actually the first nonprofit company dedicated to producing eco-friendly products, and it's one of the world's first nonprofit company which donates 100% of its net proceeds to charity. And they actually use PET bottles to change it into clothing, blanket, any kind of material, and they don't do any coloring. So if it's a clear PET bottle, the clothing is white. If it's a green bottle, oh, those are glass, but if there's a plastic bottle, the clothing is green. And then because they donate 100% of the proceeds to charities, on disaster relief missions that I've been very lucky to go on, they have these blankets, which is eco-friendly fleece blankets made with 100% recycled polyester, that's what's recognized by the EPA. It's recycled back to all the victims of disasters. And because it's made out of plastic in general, it actually dries really fast. So especially in flooding zones, it dries within 2 hours. So, and it's rarely worn. So it's eco-friendly and it's very smart. So it has been a very successful program. And they've actually came to the Vatican to spoke with the Pope, the Holy, about this, And but this is also made possible because we have over 8,000 recycling stations in Taiwan, and all the people in the recycling centers are volunteers. So not only are we helping the community coming together, but a lot of the volunteers in the recycling programs, they're actually the elderly. So it's like they are doing exercising and helping the environment at the same time. And so this is a really good program, so if anybody had any other questions about it, I feel free to share. And just one last thing, for disaster relief, a lot of countries, just like you have mentioned, due to space or due to government or due to manufacturers, they are not able to do what we do in Taiwan. So what we start with is the education about buying less of the plastic bottles instead of reusing things like these, or throwing things in the trash can, or using some creative ways. Sorry, one last thing. Just an example in Haiti, they don't have any trash cans, so they have collected these PET bottles and made them into trash cans.
Thank
so
you.
it's just
Thank you.
creative
Thank
projects
you.
like this. Thank you.
I'm sure we can take this discussion.
Yes.
For the break. Adam, please.
Thank you. Sorry, my question is sort of a little while back. This kind of idea of almost of kind of cultural relativism, and I know it was mentioned in sort of Clayton's kind of response to someone where he was talking about not kind of directly trying to duplicate what has already been done, and I just had some questions on that. I was sort of thinking about, certainly you can't go into a community and dictate terms and just say, this is what you need to do to, I guess there is some nuance there and some local understanding that needs to be added into that. But I sort of wonder, that can at times also become problematic in that if you're always trying to change something and always trying to adjust it, the scalability of it is limited. And I was sort of wondering about in being able to meet these very aggressive Sustainable Development Goal timelines, what this idea of needing to alter things to communities to very, very great extents at times how that can impact kind of the Sustainable Development Goals and the timelines that we're trying to meet very quickly.
Sorry, just wanted to, just a couple of quick points. So in terms of just changing the language, I think it's important to change the language to reflect the local realities. Although, as Professor Sachs mentioned before as well, it's important to have a common framework, which is the SDGs. So that common reference point, I think, is still absolutely critical and shouldn't be forgotten, because it's what forces us and encourages us to collaborate and work together. And boy, do we need to break those silos to work together. So that common reference point is exactly what has brought all of us here as well. And we need to use it as much as possible in order to bring people together. Just quickly on the idea about educating young people about climate action. In terms of behavior change, I think, and a lot of research shows this as well, is that the easiest group to instill or to embed behavior change within or inspire behavior change within are children. Because their thinking is able to grasp it, they're open to those new lifestyles and ways of thinking, and I think it's a very, very important initiative, and this is something that we will be doing. So let's talk more on that. And I think actually one of the wonderful initiatives that Scouts is doing is more engagement with the SDGs. And so let's talk about potentially really mobilizing the Scouts and working together. And Ahmed is a personal friend, and I was hoping with a sense that we can have some of these discussions, but I'm glad it's been raised so that we can, work together once again to try and really make an impact. Because I think from this discussion, it is clear that some of these connections are being made, and I'm actually quite excited, and I think there's going to be quite a few conversations after this. So that's it. Thank you.
I think that one thing that is true in this discussion, one thing that's important for follow-up is that outreach is extremely important. People can't support this if they don't even know about it, if they've never heard about it. And most people are well disposed to these issues. They've never had a systematic exposure to them. They have never 9 out of 10 will never have heard, or 99 out of 100 will never have heard of Sustainable Development Goals. They won't know intrinsically why they're important, perhaps, but with a little bit of explanation, they'll find them very useful. That's also true of politicians. Not all, but many. So I really encourage you to start at the level of awareness and public education. And there are 2 areas that I think are extremely important, maybe 3, depending on where you sit and what you do. One is local universities. And I really would like SDSN Youth to work with you to have youth chapters at the universities and the students pressing the faculty also. Why aren't you doing this? What could we be doing? Why don't we have an event this spring on this? Why don't we have faculty discussing climate change or poverty in our community or other issues or the holistic approach? Or if it's a Catholic university, Laudato Si, or if it's a secular university, Laudato Si. But get this on the agenda. Get it talked about. The hardest part of everything is attention, awareness. So that is something that can be done. And we have an organization, Sustainable Development Solutions Network, that can help you to do that. Help you with information, help you with materials, help you with the guidance on the kinds of events that have worked very, very successfully, and so on. So this is one specific way. A second is with cities. City governments need to make sure the water's safe, the flooding, the droughts, the other environmental challenges are being addressed with foresight, the infrastructure, and so on. Not that it's easy for cities to solve all of these problems, but for cities to take on sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals is a good tool for cities around the world. Or if you're in a rural area, for your district. So I don't mean it to be urban versus rural, I mean it to be local government. I serve as the co-chair for New York City of its sustainability advisory board for the city. New York City has a plan once a year on how to achieve sustainable development called One NYC. They work hard at it. The advisory board brings academics, young people, businesses to be a counterpart with the city on these issues. This is something you can start also. Clayton has done this, and this is what you're doing. But the idea that any city should have a sustainable development program, a set of goals for 2030, a set of metrics, I would say is a sine qua non for even basic governance now. On the question of how to identify the goals, the U.S. is a very particular place. It has, by the way, in opinion surveys, strong public support for the United Nations. But there's a group of committed anti-UN right-wing politics. But it's not by any means the dominant part of American society. And I read these opinion surveys for a living. I have to. Most Americans are well disposed to the United Nations. Till today, despite a lot of propaganda, a lot of hate literature from the far right, the gun community, and so forth, there's a lot of really weird misinformation that is put out. It's just weirdness. But it's not in any way a dominant feeling. Now, I have launched last week with a number of colleagues America's Goals as a political vehicle. We didn't call them Sustainable Development Goals for America, we called them America's Goals. But if you look at them, they're basically the Sustainable Development Goals, a bit repackaged. There are only 7 rather than 17, but they each have 3 targets, and so they span the whole space of the Sustainable Development Goals. We did opinion surveys and focus groups before launching this. They are very well received by the broad majority of the public, according to this evidence. So I don't think you're going to face a big backlash. I think you will just face, what are those? Why should we do this? What does it mean? What does it mean for us? One more short advice. Sustainable Development Goals means economic well-being, fairness and justice, and environmental sustainability. So if you think about it in those 3 basic terms, every community has challenges on the economy, jobs or basic infrastructure or other issues. every community has questions of fairness. The marginalized, the vulnerable, minority groups, and every community these days has big environmental questions: floods, droughts, heat waves, forest fires. It's part of your job to help understand, of those three dimensions, what's really resonant for our region, our area. Why are these important for us? We can help you to do that also as a clearinghouse, ideas, data, dashboards, and I want us to have an institutionalized way. You're going to have a session on the SDGs in Mumbai, and you write, can you help? I don't want you not to get an answer. I don't want you to hear we're really preoccupied. I don't want you to hear we don't know anything about Mumbai. So I would like you to have a sensible support. That's what we will also budget for and staff for, so that SDSN Youth can do that. And we have the SDG Academy, we have other resources which we really will develop for you. But what we can't do is host an SDG session in Mumbai. That has to be you. There's no way we can do this all over the world. But what we can do is help give you support to do it. Frankly, don't worry about whether it's effective or not right now, because the first point of efficacy is awareness, making contact, helping people to understand that this is actually a challenge. When it comes to implementing policies, spending vast resources, it's good to have more evidence than that, but the evidence base that you need right now is 13 years left. Your neighbors don't even know about this. It's really important. You care about it. That's enough evidence. But what you need to do is find the right local partners, whether it's the mayor's office, whether it's the university, whether it's your advisor at school, whether it's your NGO that can open the doors to the community and get publicity. Bring in the news media, bring in reporters, use social media, bring in a local star. Believe me, there are a lot of people very talented, whether they're a sports star or a movie star or a rock star, that want to contribute. They want to. Every time I ask, people say yes, they want to. Last week, Yo-Yo Ma played a solo concert because he's a wonderful person, and we asked, and there he was, Carnegie Hall, in his detour of his conference, to just give that. A few days later, the biggest names in rock music, ending with Stevie Wonder on stage, donated their time for the Global Citizens Festival. Free donation with a lot of effort to be part of making the SDGs known. You can find these people. Cold call them. Find who their office manager is. Find who their local promotion agent is. They're nice people, really. And so get them to come and help. And then the politicians can't miss it. Politicians want stars standing next to them. So this is really fun, interesting. You'll find it very exciting. And you really be the ambassadors for this, and then press Sam morning, noon, and night, because he will deliver, and we will deliver. We really will, to help you to do this. But this is absolutely one way in. And my suggestion is all of this needs thinking at the local level. as well, obviously, is at all levels, but at the local level. It took New York City a couple of years to even formulate a document. Does Lagos have an SDG plan? It's had a number of good governors trying very hard in a very complicated place, but maybe we can do something to help. This could be a way in. I don't know the Mumbai government whether, but there's flooding all the time, I know. And it's got environmental challenges and many, many other challenges. And there are a lot of people in Mumbai that we work with, the Birlas and Godreges and others that would be very happy to help support a grassroots big initiative as well. So this is something that I'm sure that we could help to do.
Thank you, Professor. On this uplifting note, I would like to wrap up, and I encourage you to continue the conversation outside where we've ran a bit over time. So thank you. And thank you, panelists, for your wonderful input.